our third fellowship that we have done now, and we were lucky enough to have five fellows come through during this round and helped lead them through creating a podcast to launch into the democracy space, much like the podcasts on our network, but bringing their voice to the table. And we spent quite a bit of the fellowship helping them to craft that, honing in on an idea that was important to them within this space and developing it into a podcast to allow them to get their voice out. I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Jenna for a few opening comments, and then I'll give you guys a quick rundown of what you could expect from each of our fellows, and then we'll let them share some of the great work that they've been doing. So, Jenna, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon, and great to see everyone. Thank you all for making time at the end of the workday for many of us to come and celebrate our spring 2024 cohort of fellows. This is our third time doing the fellowship, and it just gets stronger and stronger every time. So we have a fantastic group of young women in this cohort, and I can't wait for you to hear their podcasts. I was listening to their trailers and episodes just before we got on this call, and the production value is really top notch, and they really have a very well honed concept for their show and point of view that they're trying to get across. And I think you'll hear that when you get to hear from each of them. So I won't take up too much more of the time, but I do just want to say thank you to David Nevins and the Bridge Alliance for providing funding that allowed us to send recording equipment to the fellows, which helped them get professional sound quality and all of those things. And we'll be with them. Hopefully they'll continue using all of that great gear long after this fellowship ends. And then lastly, thank you, of course, to Brandon Stover for putting together an excellent fellowship curriculum. The podcast would not have sounded as good without the instruction that Brandon put together and the work that he did with the fellows one-on-one. He held office hours every week and worked with the fellows one-on-one to help them throughout their podcast. And I know as well, we have several folks here who joined us throughout the fellowship to participate in mock interviews and help the fellows as they learned both about important topics in democracy and about how to become a podcaster. So if you were among those folks who joined us, or if you're watching this recording and you joined us, know that we're very, very grateful for you taking the time to help make this program a success. I'll turn it back over to you, Brandon.
Thanks, Jenna. So to give you guys a quick overview what to expect, each one of our fellows is going to give a little bit of a pitch about their podcast. So explain what their idea was, who the audience is that they're trying to speak to, and a little bit about their first episode and any sorts of development that they've done around that. I've received each of their episodes, as Jenna was mentioning, have had a listen to a few of them. Great production value. After the commencement ends today, we'll be taking this video and publishing it alongside their podcast episodes on our network feed. And you can expect to see those coming out next week and the following week as they roll out. And we will send emails to you if you're part of our newsletter, of a culmination email of all the episodes that have been published. So you can expect that. Each fellow today will get about 5 minutes to give their pitch, and then we'll have about 5 minutes for the audience to ask questions about their podcast and or anything about the fellowship in general. So our first person presenting today will be April Kim. And again, she'll have about 5 minutes to pitch. So April, I will go ahead and hand it off to you.
Thank you, Brandon. Hi, everyone. My name is April Kim. I'm currently an undergraduate student at the University of Michigan. I'm pursuing a double major in political science and philosophy and a double minor in international studies and Asian languages and cultures. So what really inspired my delve into politics was my upbringing on the island of Guam. And that is what my first episode will be featuring. Just discussing the implications of American democracy on Guam. Overarchingly, my podcast is called Democracy Beyond Borders, looking at how the US democracy has come to redefine democracy in its own way and observing its implications, its consequences, and its causal effects, all that throughout different regimes and countries around the world. So more specifically, my first episode looks at the lack of congressional rights for US citizens on residing on US territories. So similarly, like growing up on Guam, I have been as an American citizen, but there are just some implications of democracy that are different within the greater branch of being an American citizen. So by taking a look at a closer observation of what it really means to be an American citizen living under democracy was a big causal theme and just a big focus for my episode. Overarchingly, yeah, so this is my cover art. So hopefully in the future episodes, I'll be taking a look at um, implications of US democracy beyond, like outside of the mainland US. So just looking at different cases in the Middle East or even in Asia, looking at how colonialism kind of perpetuates those ideologies. If anybody has any questions about my podcast, I'd be open to those.
April, can you tell us a little bit more about the format of the show? Do you have guests, a co-host? What can people expect when they tune in?
So I feel like a big thing about me, what really got me into podcasts specifically is just a lot of investigative journalism, the format of specifically appealing to um, other people around my age, where I feel like democracy, it's really important to learn of the different implications of democracy and what it really means to live in a democratic society. So the basic format of my podcast, so that's the target audience, my basic format revolves around um, incorporating, typically I'm a big music person, so I feel like combining my love for music and then podcasting and all that, just to use that as a clip of attention. There are some instrumentals that play, typically like very well-known songs, that just to better appeal to the audience, all at the same time nailing some pretty hard-hitting points.
And are you thinking about developing this as an ongoing podcast or a series?
I'm thinking of doing it as an ongoing podcast. I think that um just like the theme of the whole podcast being democracy beyond borders, is really a lot that I can do with it. I feel like I could go um look at the past and just see how historically it's developed. So I feel like in that way I could do it into maybe like a three-part series looking at the past implications, what we're dealing with now, and also just pushing a little bit into the future, seeing if we continue in this way, what living in a democratic society would look like. But I feel like the big focus for me was to just do it piece by piece. So just for now, just by different government types, different nation states, etc.
Any other questions for April? And you can go ahead, since there's so many people in the room, take yourself off mute and
Okay.
ask the question.
If So I have one more question, April. So there, you're covering some very complex topics, as you mentioned. How do you, or how have you thought about breaking those down into a way that's digestible and understandable to someone who's maybe coming in without the level of knowledge that you have in these areas?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And honestly, that was a really big struggle when I was just writing the script and doing my research, because I felt like there was so much to talk about and the material is really dense, I would say, for a conversational piece. So what I did was I kind of structured my points into main clauses. So phrases that are commonly associated with democracy, or like that people are really familiar with, like inclusivity or diversity, inclusion, phrases like key phrases like those that people will pick up on, oh, I've heard these phrases before, I know what this is. And then from those very generic, broader terms, really digging into those parts and breaking apart how they relate to democracy and those implications, I feel like was really helpful overall to like the structure of my episode.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Well, first I want to say I like how you're dividing it up into clauses with like different elements of democracy. I think that's a really great idea, especially when thinking about how you're dividing them into episodes. I like that a lot. But my question is, do you plan on having guests frequently on your podcast? Because I know that we had to interview a guest, but I was wondering if it's mainly going to be you, because I know that you definitely have personal ties to it, or are you also going to be like interviewing people? And if so, what are some ideas for guests that you might have?
I think guess-wise, it would be really interesting to take advantage of my position as a political science student right now at the University of Michigan. I would argue that we are one of like the most polarized student bodies in the US, like in regards to college campuses. And I feel like I've encountered a wide range of professors who have felt a specific way about specific topics. And I feel like bringing in different professors from different places, obviously they have a strong educational background from very like a wide range of different places and cultures or whatnot. So I feel like that would be really interesting. Obviously, it would be ideal for me to speak with someone from that country. Like again, in episode 1, I'm from Guam, so I've lived in a US territory my whole life. So I feel like that perspective was just kind of out there for me to just use. But I think definitely in the future, speaking to specific residents who live under that government, under like the relation to American democracy would be really helpful.
Excellent. Thank you, April. We're gonna go ahead and shift over to Virginia, and she will present her podcast.
Hi, everyone. Uh-oh. Sorry, my video wasn't working on my laptop. Can you hear me? Okay,
Yes, we
great.
can.
Okay, great. My video wasn't working on my laptop, so I just wanted you to be able to see me. Hi, everyone. I'm Virginia Jones, and my podcast is titled Jonesing Around. And this was just kind of because I wanted my podcast to be kind of in contrast to what we just heard before, more conversational and just very inclusive. So yeah, there's my artwork. And yeah, I had one with my name on it too, but if you want to watch my trailer, it would be in that. But yeah, so my goal is really just to invite kind of people specifically from my generation, but also just young adults, I feel like in general, to engage in political conversations in a way where it doesn't really have to be so kind of scary, because I feel like from my college experience, a lot of people just really don't want to be a part of the conversation. So my goal is really to just open up the door and encourage people to be involved, because in just a few years, we're going to be the ones who really feel the effects from, you know, what's going on in the political world. So my format of mine would be kind of like 3-week segments, I guess. And for each week, I wanted to have someone who focuses more, who has like a background in political science, history, a given topic. And I want to spend 3 weeks kind of focusing on that topic. So having 2 people, ideally from a different like viewpoints. So one first week and then a different one the second week. And then the third week, I'd want someone from my generation or a college student to kind of give their own thoughts and perspectives on what's going on. So that was just kind of the idea of this, because I feel like it would be a great way to just hear a variety of perspectives, and also like having the third person just keeping it very just light and not too much pressure, just to kind of again open the door to having these conversations. And so that's also why it goes back to the title Jonesing Around. Like I wanted this to be very natural, kind of no pressure, but also to be really informative, to get people into having these conversations. So yeah, I guess that might be all I have.
Virginia, I have a question about how you think you'll connect the audience between the 3 weeks. I could see some people tuning in for one episode, but maybe not having listened to the other episodes and getting those other perspectives.
Right. I feel like that was kind of the goal of it too, was having it be like for everyone. Like I said my target audience was young adults, but I feel like that's my goal is to get my generation involved in it. So that's kind of what my aim was by having like only one episodes be with one of the college students, because what if only like only people like from my generation, they only listen to that, but maybe that will bring them into wanting to listen to the other two people and vice versa. So I feel like that choice, like I can see why you have that question, but I feel like it was kind of strategic in the sense because I wanted to be open to a lot of different people. So yeah, that answers that.
Virginia, can you just tell us a little bit more about you, your background, and
Oh,
how that maybe informs your podcast?
yes. I'm so sorry. I totally skipped over that. My dog was scratching on the door. But yeah, so I'm Virginia Jones. I'm from Virginia Beach, Virginia. I go to school at the University of South Carolina right now. I am a public relations major and a political science minor. I started getting into politics when I was at I went to boarding school in Pennsylvania, and that was a pretty big change for me in terms of like my environment in a political sense. I feel like I never really was involved in politics because I'd only really heard like one kind of belief. And when I went to my boarding school, I was hearing an entirely different side of things. So I really was brought into this environment where I was kind of challenging my ideas a lot. And I feel like that's why I wanted to have this podcast, because there were so many things, and even still to this day, where I'm always changing. I'm always like changing my beliefs, and like when I hear new information, and I think that I just really want to encourage other people to do the same. And the only way I think to do that is by allowing people to speak, and not just only professionals, but also just anyone. So that was really my goal for this. And I guess, yeah, I tried to incorporate that into my education as best as I could. And yeah, so that's what I've been looking forward to doing.
Hi,
Oh,
Virginia. Go ahead.
sorry. I just thought of something too. Well, a lot of this I also mentioned in my first episode. So kind of my boarding school background with my interview with Corey Nathan. So yeah, if you want to listen to that, I cover a lot of that there. But yes.
Cool. Hi, I'm Katie DeFiore. I'm a podcast producer in State College area. I really love your idea for your podcast. It reminds me a lot of something that I did when I was in college. I was just curious how you plan on finding and selecting your guests. If you're planning on doing like guests who aren't already involved in politics, it can be difficult to say like my guests are going to be anyone. It opens it up for it to be like anyone, but also how do you go about finding the person that you want to be interviewed and to make sure that they're not going to be, doing the kind of talking and political conversation that you're trying to avoid.
Right. That's a great question. I've actually been keeping like a list ongoing of this for maybe like the last year and a half. So I have a list of like random people that I've just met, and I'm like, one day you might be useful. But keeping it more in like I guess like a closer like vicinity to me, I'd really love to do interviews in person. Like that would be my goal, like very much. I need my friend to help me figure out how to like connect the video to it and everything, but very much like the sitting on bean bags with the microphones kind of deal. Like I would love to do something like that. I definitely have certain people in mind, like you said, like not just anyone I'm friends with. I would like to do this. I would like someone who maybe doesn't have any background or like set beliefs, but is willing to kind of like walk around with this. But like I said, it doesn't have to solely be focused on a certain top. Like I'd like it to be around that. I would like the guest to listen to the two previous interviews, just so they can kind of have that as background. But obviously I'd want some like icebreakers and just try and make it like as fun and inclusive as possible.
Virginia, can you talk about how you approach having conversations with people who have different points of view, especially if it's somebody whose views you might not personally agree with?
Okay. Well, I feel like I've dealt with this a lot because like I said, with my background and why I chose to get into political science in general was that my transition, especially in the pandemic, was kind of, I feel like I had this a lot where I was having these opinions that were very different than what was kind of going on around me. And it made me learn just how things like how to let people say what they want to say and not push them into a corner. So like they start, because people they can tend to do that. They can start to feel like, oh, you like an attack on my belief is an attack against me. And that's not what I believe. And I want people to understand that. And I also feel like I'm very much someone who will admit when I don't know something and will say, I'll have to look into that. So I feel like that's a big thing for me, is like admitting when I don't know something, or like when someone says something that I don't necessarily agree with, like saying like, okay, well, how did you come to this conclusion? And just asking questions, because that really does share a lot. And maybe like this person didn't like fully actually come to this conclusion, and we can work through that. And maybe they realize, oh, wait, you're kind of right. Or maybe they're like, I go through it with them and they are completely like valid for believing a thing, and then they trust their opinions more. They know that this is something they actually believe, and I feel like the audience will gain something from this as well. So that's also another goal of mine.
Excellent. Thank you, Virginia.
Yeah.
We're going to go ahead and shift on to Kayla Anderson. So Kayla, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. My name's Kayla. I'm going to be a senior in the fall. I go to Ohio State, and I'm also majoring in political science with a minor in Spanish. I made this podcast about social justice because that's something that is really interesting to me. And so I talk a lot about all the current injustices going on in our criminal justice system, and kind of the ironies of that. And so I really just want to like do or share this information because I think it's important right now, especially because DEI and social activism are at risk in our country. Like in Florida, they banned universities from allowing social activism or DEI. It's at risk in Ohio and other universities across the nation. So I feel like this is really important to me because if people aren't going to be able to learn this at school, this is a way I can spread the word. And it's also different because it's not like academic, maybe how it might be in a school setting. It's hearing, I interview people who have been involved in the criminal justice system in some way. So my first episode, I interviewed someone who went to prison. And my second episode, I interviewed someone who was wrongfully convicted and was in jail for 23 years for a crime they didn't commit. So just to get a lot of different perspectives. And I plan to interview police officers. So I just don't want it to be like jaded or swing to one side. Like I just want to get everybody's perspective and hope that that gives insight on what changes we can make in our country so that everybody gets to experience its greatness.
Questions for Kayla?
Curious, how did you make those connections? I mean, those are, not like going down the hall of your dorm, right?
Yeah.
That seems like a lot of work.
Yeah. So my first episode where I interviewed the prisoner, it's actually my brother. So that was the easy one to find. But his story was kind of interesting because it's different from wrongful conviction because he did commit this crime, but he also, it's very intricate because in one episode I get to talk about reentry, his experience in prison, police brutality that he faced, all different types of things, which really stresses like that a lot of these issues are overlapping. And then the second episode, I was talking to my uncle and he was telling me how his coworker was just recently released, like a few years ago, exonerated and released from prison after being in there for 23 years. So I just thought that would be really cool to talk with him. And I've just been learning so much about wrongful conviction. And that's kind of what honestly got me interested in government and law in the first place. I watched a movie called Just Mercy, and it was about a man on death row for a crime he didn't commit. So that like infuriated me. I didn't even know that was going on. So I feel like that's what kind of got me passionate about stuff like this.
That's really incredible. I look forward to listening to your episodes. My question for you is, how did you prepare for that interview? I mean, both of them are going to be emotionally charged in different ways. How did you prepare for those interviews, both like on a research side and an emotional side? And did you, in like the style of it, was it meant to be like, did you try to make it, personable, or was it more like research, hard facts focused?
Yeah, so I kind of went based off of what I like, which is just like a more casual vibe. I didn't want it to be quoting all these studies. And I feel like just a natural, I wanted it to be like someone listening to a conversation of me and my friend, basically, like very casual, but still talking about facts, still looking up things that are true and talking about that here and there. But so that was like my inspiration for that. And also, I feel like that's just more accessible in a way. Like if I'm using all these big words in these advanced studies, I feel like it would turn away a lot of people. So I feel like this is something that everyone can understand, no matter your level of academia. And I prepared I pre-interviewed my brother because I actually didn't know what happened. I never knew. So I pre-interviewed him to like get a gist for what happened, but not everything, so that it would be a natural conversation when I was finding out his answers. So I think that really helped because the conversation really flowed. And then for my second episode, I didn't really pre-interview him as much, but I looked up because he's like more well known. Like so there's stuff online about him. I read articles, I read the whole like case, what happened, to prepare for that. So I knew I was familiar with the background of the case.
Virginia?
I don't think I have any questions, but I just want to say I really, really like kind of everything about your podcast and just having it be really personal and having people share their own stories, because I think that that will just like attract so many people because it's real and it's just very authentic. And I also just appreciate how like you have done, like you will do like some like research kind of before, but only enough so you can like be engaged, but also be engaged in the sense that you don't know enough information, so you're hearing someone else's story like in real time. And I feel like that's just so authentic, and it just really adds something special to your podcast.
Thanks. I like that aspect too, because I feel like it adds something. Sorry, I don't know. Can you guys see me? My iPad is messing up. Okay, sorry. But yeah, I feel like it adds something to be able to hear from people who've experienced it firsthand, literally, rather than just saying, I read this and this person, and so on and so forth. I feel like it's better to hear it from them. I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth. And I just like that they can tell their story and share their perspective. And maybe we can get some insight on how that can help us improve.
Maggie?
First, I wanted to say I like your cover art. I feel like it's very eye-catching since you're like taking something familiar and changing it up a bit. I think that's really interesting. And then also my question is, how do you think what are your plans to advertise this to your intended audience? And if you could tell us a little bit more about your intended audience too.
Yeah, so I was kind of struggling with this one because I want the people who need to hear it, but also I feel like a lot of the things I did are more likely to attract people who don't need to hear it as much, if that makes sense. So people who already agree that there's problems in our justice system, but they just don't know the extent of it, or they've never heard or know someone personally that's been through this. And I still think that's a valuable like audience member. But I do, that was what I would say my audience is. But I will say like I said, I think maybe some of the things like Brendan and I talked about my cover art beforehand and how it could be a little bit controversial. But I used it anyways because I feel like it was true to me and how I feel. And I don't think, in my opinion, that it should be controversial, because why wouldn't we want this country to be great for everybody? That it would only benefit everybody. So yeah, that was kind of my thoughts on that. Hopefully that answered your question.
So Kayla, you started off your comments talking about the attacks on DEI education in various places throughout the country. And DEI and education and criminal justice are often talked about in the media and elsewhere. I wonder if you see a goal of your podcast is connecting them, or how you think about the fact that they are often framed as separate issues, separate problems, etc.
You're saying DEI and social justice?
I guess
Concept?
criminal justice specifically, like criminal. I mean, obviously, people of color, communities of color are disproportionately impacted by issues in criminal justice. But when it comes to the issues in DEI and education and access to that information, it's often talked about separately from the problems with the criminal justice system.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I personally feel really strongly about this happening because, one, I'm a Black student and a lot of the orgs I'm in are minorities. And it's like a place we can, because I go to a predominantly white school and I really like my school, but it's like one of the few spaces I can be in where people look like me and have shared experiences. So the fact that like those spaces will no longer be able to exist is upsetting. And like it feels like a personal attack because I'm just existing, and I feel like that shouldn't be so much of an issue. But thankfully, I'm blessed enough to have parents who were able to pay for my college, but a lot of people do not have that option. The majority of people do not have that option. And so programs like we have at OSU, the Moral Scholarship Program, where students can get a full ride or tuition covered for their work in DEI and social activism and that sort of thing. And that's funded through the university. So these bills and laws would take all of that away, and that's taking away chances for a lot of people who want to better themselves and get an education and be a productive citizen, and we're taking that away. So, and I feel like that leads directly into, because I think education and the criminal justice system overlap a lot. I think a lot of these issues overlap, and it's really complex, and it's just like one big jumbled mess. But I feel like DEI and our criminal justice system are definitely related, and I feel like my podcast puts them together as one, because I do kind of focus, because my lived experience is as a Black person, so I do think about it from like a minority perspective, and how like not only is the criminal justice system, like people will say prisons may be inhumane, whether whoever's in them, doesn't matter the color, but I'm looking at it like prisons are inhumane, and the majority of people in prisons are people of color. Like that, I kind of tie both in, I feel like.
Excellent. Thank you, Kayla. All right, so we're going to hand it off to Maggie for her to share her podcast.
Hello, everyone. So, a little bit about me. I actually just graduated high school yesterday. I'm from the Chicago suburbs. And thanks. And next year I'll be attending University of Missouri and I'll be double majoring in journalism and political science. And so I've had a lot of experience journalism wise in print and also video over my past 4 years in high school through high school things and outside things, but I didn't really have any audio and podcasting experience. And so when I came across this, it really piqued my interest because I just didn't have that experience and I wanted to explore it. And before I go into what my podcast is about, I want to say that I have learned a ton through this on, recording your podcast, how to use equipment, how to have like that conversational form of journalism because through video, you ask the questions and you just need to capture what the interviewee is saying. And then through print, it's sort of the same way. You're just capturing those quotes that you insert into your writing. But for podcasting, it's completely different because your voice is also, not that I'm saying your voice doesn't matter in the other mediums of journalism, but it's a little bit more prevalent when you're listening to it. And I mean, obviously, you want most of the podcast to be if you're interviewing somebody with your subject, but just learning how to have a conversation has been really important. I mean, I can have a conversation, but have a conversation on a podcast, it takes time and takes practice. And when I was filming the part of my first episode that has a guest in it, it was definitely a struggle at first. But I with experience and with practice, that will definitely get better. And I think that that'll help my skills a lot. And I just want to thank some people. I want to thank the other fellows on this because you guys have been really helpful in meetings with like each other brainstorming, and that has been really great and really helpful. And even to get the topic of my whole podcast together, you guys really gave me a lot of great suggestions. So that has been really helpful. And also just, I mean, you guys can all tell on this Zoom call, everybody is so passionate about their topics. So I'm really excited to tune into their podcast once they come out soon. And so, yeah, I'm just really excited. So thank you, fellows. Next, I want to thank Brandon for just like leading our classes and being a great mentor to all of us. And then I'd also like to thank the Democracy Group just for connecting us with the guests and the resources that we've had all those weeks. And then also obviously our podcasting equipment that has been super helpful and a learning experience of itself on how to do this, how to record with this stuff and how to edit our podcast. That has been huge. So yeah, sorry, a lot of thank yous, but thank you guys. I have always had an interest in politics, social issues, and geography. And with geography, there are so many different things to explore. And so my podcast is called Uneven Grounds, Exploring Inequalities in Geography. And so every single week, I'm going to be taking a look at a different social issue that is rooted in geography, where you live, those sorts of things. So my first episode, I actually interviewed Kelly Seacrest, who works for she works for the Ranked Choice Voting Resources Network. And so the issue that I was looking into in that one podcast was looking into electoral inequalities. So based on where you live and how that affects your voting and the outcomes of voting, whether that's gerrymandering, so isolating people into boundaries because of their demographics and how that can manipulate an election, but also like the Electoral College federally. And that really played into my interview with Kelly further on in the episode. And so the structure of it is usually going to be, at least for my first episode and what I plan for it to be, is going to be, I'm going to outline an issue, but I also want to present a solution. So for my first episode, that solution could have been, a possible solution is ranked choice voting and how that works, how that's implemented and how it helps people. And so every episode I'm going to be exploring a solution and then also some other topics for my episodes, because I'm sure you guys are interested, would be looking at urban versus rural education quality. Are people who are living in rural areas getting the same education quality? Food deserts, that's a huge thing. How far away do you live to affordable and affordable food that is healthy for you, right? Redlining, the history of that and how that impacts where people are living and how much they're paying, right? Gentrification, that's another huge thing. Regional stereotypes, right? If you live in the South, somebody might have a stereotype for you if you lived on the East Coast, right? So that's another thing. So there are all these different things that I have had a lot of interest in these topics, especially a lot of them are social topics, but they do have to, they do go into geography. So my overall arching umbrella of it is geography. So yeah, and like I said, it's very like solutions based. And yeah. Um, so I would say like I definitely have grown, even though we've only done one episode, just in my conversational podcasting skills. And that was a struggle at first, but I know with time it's gonna get um a lot better. And then I would say that my audience would definitely be younger people and a YouTuber that I've been very inspired by is Johnny Harris. If any of you know his work, he is really great. He does a lot on like political and geographical issues and kind of targeting an audience similar to his that likes those sorts of history, geography, social issues, but also people who are young and don't know a lot about those issues, right? And that's another reason why I made it so solutions based was because it's you know if you're a young person and you're listening to this, it can be kind of depressing, right? These issues. But if it presents a solution, it could inspire you to do something about that, right? Or to look into that solution more. So that's why I created that structure. And my mentor, Richard, who I don't think he's on the call today, but he's been a huge help. He was the one who was suggesting every episode going into a solution for each one of these problems. So yeah, I think that's everything I have to say. Yeah. So if you guys have any questions, and if you, I think I have cover art. I sent it to Brandon a while ago. If you want to show that, if you have it. So yeah. If you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
I do have a question, but also a comment first. I think that this topic is actually really interesting, and maybe it doesn't seem like it at first, but like when you go into it, there's so many, like I would never have realized that there's so much to talk about when it comes to inequalities with geography. Like I could have only thought of one thing and you listed like a bunch I would never have even thought of. So that's really cool. And I think a lot of people will probably like feel the same, like, oh, how can you talk about this much stuff? But there's like, it actually applies to a lot. So I think that's really cool. And I was wondering if you were planning to interview someone in all your episodes, or just do some of them just like investigative journalism type of episode.
I think for right now, while I'm finding my footing with this podcast, I do want to mainly interview people, maybe talk about an issue and then interview somebody and either them presenting a solution or just them adding to the conversation. Maybe that's just because of my like confidence level isn't so high with this medium yet. So I think having an interview with someone and I interviewed Kelly Seacrest, who is like an expert in ranked choice voting, right? But I'm also interested in voting people who, and sorry, interested in interviewing people who have been affected by these things. So maybe interviewing somebody who does live in a food desert and how like that works with them grocery shopping, what kind of food they eat, how they have to budget for getting food, how far they have to travel. So those sorts of things. So not just experts, because I feel like that can make it a little stuffy at times if it's just every single time you're interviewing like a professor or a legal person, like it just gets kind of repetitive. So yeah, I definitely want to interview all sorts of people. And then once I get my footing, I'll still do interviews just because I like talking to people and finding out more information. But I also definitely want to include my own research and my own parts of the podcast as well. Virginia?
I was just gonna say you kind of just took the words out of my mouth with what you just said, but I think what's so great about yours is you do have like this such a large like umbrella, and you listed all these topics that I didn't even like connect, because yes, you with your first interview, what you just took the words out of my mouth, you have someone who is like very professional in covering something that honestly like I was just learning in my political science classes this year. So
Yeah.
like you're so ahead. I was also gonna say congratulations on graduating high school, because this
Thank
is
you.
a lot of my tackle in my classes as a senior. So yeah, so congratulations. But then again, I was gonna say you have so much room with this topic too to get guests in like normal people who just like have been affected by this. Because, you know, when you mentioned just all the other topics, I could think of a lot of people off the top of my head who I was like, oh, this girl should talk to X, Y, and Z. So anyways, I just want to say that because you just nailed everything I was thinking.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and I definitely think I was a little bit nervous at first having a pretty broad topic, but I would say that it's not so broad. It's like inequalities in geography, but it's broad enough where I can explore so many different things, but they are all connected. All of these people are facing inequalities because of where they live. Like there might be other factors that play into it, like income or race, those sorts of things, but you know, where you live is a really big thing, especially in this country, when you're having access to things like food or education or even power in the voting booth. So yeah, thank you, Virginia. Does anybody else have questions?
Yeah, Maggie, I really look forward to listening to your podcast. And also, as someone whose background is in journalism, I absolutely loved solutions journalism. And I was wondering, what was the research process for you look like? What did that look like? And also, did you come across any piece of evidence or a piece of information that you thought was super interesting? And I was wondering if you could share that with us.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, actually, it's kind of funny. My first episode, I wasn't sure because there were so many topics, but um on one of our Zoom calls for this fellowship, we all got connected with a guest, and my guest was Kelly Seacrest. And before that, I was looking into it, and I was like, okay, ranked choice voting, this is an interesting topic, but how can this play into my podcast? Because we didn't have to use that interview. Like we could have just used it as practice or just like asking somebody about how they do their podcast. But I was thinking about it, and then I met with my mentor, Richard, and he was telling me like, well, it could connect because it's, you know, you did mention that you want to do election inequalities, and that would be a solution. And he's really the one that said solutions would be a good idea. So I really kind of stumbled upon having, I wouldn't like, I guess I would say the solution of ranked choice voting kind of just happened. Like I didn't go out and find it, but I just got connected with it through the democracy group. So that was super helpful. And something really interesting, I guess, that she said in the interview, and this wasn't through my own research, but you know, something that I thought I would talk about was she said how ranked choice voting can actually bring issues more towards the middle and reduce polarization, because when you have just like regular voting, right? Whoever has the most votes just automatically wins. You just pick one candidate. And most of the time you just pick the candidate that your party, especially in general elections, that is your party. So if you're a Republican, you'll probably pick the Republican. If you're a Democrat, you'll probably pick the Democrat, right? But with ranked choice voting, it's a lot more complicated, but in a good way, because now there are a ton of candidates to look at, right? In a local race, there are usually a lot of candidates running for something that is not necessarily party-based. But with that, you want to do your own research, because if your first candidate doesn't get enough votes, you know, your second candidate might, right? So when you're ranking them, you want to do research on all of them, right? So that's good because it's just increasing people's awareness, but it's also bringing issues more towards the middle, because a candidate that may have just in a regular election just tried to appeal as much to the Democratic Party, right? They're going to try to appeal more to the middle ground voters and even the conservative voters, right? Because they're trying to get their second place vote or their third place vote, right? So that's what she told me, and I just think that's so interesting that it can really even not just help elections, but help just the ideology divide that we have right now in our country, which is like a huge issue, right? And it's again, it's interesting how geography does play into that. Like you don't really think about it, but sometimes, but then you catch it and it's like, wow, geography can have a huge impact on all of these issues, elections, food, all that sorts of things. So yeah, thank you, Jesse, for that question.
Right. We're going to go ahead and switch to Simran. So thank you, Maggie. And Simran, the floor is yours.
So, hi, my name is Simran. I'm a junior in high school. And so my interest really lies in journalism and education. And so that's kind of what I was thinking about as I went into the fellowship. And something else that was also I'll admit that originally when I started the fellowship, I didn't really know where I wanted to go, in what direction. I just knew I wanted to do something with education. And and just youth perspective, because youth perspective is really, really important as like my generation and the upcoming generation kind of goes into the workforce and takes over like positions in government and just becomes, the next generation that's leading the country. And so that's kind of what I know I wanted to do when I started the podcast or when I started the fellowship. And so then the idea from that came, like from that I kind of figured out that, what's kind of interesting about me, what's something that's kind of unique about me. And I realized something that a lot of people find interesting is that I have a lot of friends outside of not only my state, but also the country. So I have a lot of friends in like Brazil, China, Hong Kong. And I think a lot of people are really fascinated by that because sometimes it's really hard to, make connections outside of the area where you live in, even with technology. And so I thought, why not do something with that? Why not get their perspective on topics that I find really, really interesting? And so for my first episode, what I decided to do was, start small maybe. And also I was admittedly a little bit nervous about just doing my first episode and kind of starting off. So I was like, why don't I ask my best friend to do a podcast episode with me, just so we can talk about kind of our school environment, what we see, like some of the challenges we faced with things like technology, also virtual school during the pandemic, which was a very challenging time for a lot of us. And then also things like academic pressure, because we live in a very high achieving area, and that translates to a lot of anxiety and depression and even suicide in our area. So just kind of talking about those things. And basically it wasn't really different from the conversations we have in real life, like together every day. It was really just recording that and kind of, I guess, polishing it and kind of choosing a direction to go in. And so that's kind of how the first episode came to be. And I really enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun doing that. And so looking forward, I'm really excited because I told one of my friends about the podcast, and she lives in Brazil, and so I think we're probably going to record an episode soon in the next coming weeks about kind of the difference between my experience in Georgia as opposed to her experience in Brazil, because we did meet through a math program last summer, and so we kind of have similar educational experiences, but also obviously very different because of where we live. So that's one thing I'm really excited about moving forward. And another thing is that I get to go to Stanford for a couple weeks this summer, so in June and July. So I'm going to be staying at Stanford University, and I'm going to be meeting one of my friends from China. I've never met her in person, but I've connected with her before, and so I'm hoping maybe we get to record a podcast episode at Stanford about our different educational experiences and just different takes on like maybe the relationship between China and the U.S. and just what's going on in the world. So a lot of different ideas, trying to get my friends on board, trying to tell them, what I'm trying to do, and really excited to see where that goes. But yes.
Virginia, you're still on mute.
I love your background in this because I went to an international boarding school. So like I have friends from Brazil, China, Germany, France, like everywhere. So and it was crazy, just like all of that experience. Everything you said in the introduction, I just heavily related to. And I just was thinking like when I have conversations with my friends who are from these places, and I've just learned so much about different political systems and like what other countries, like how they perceive the United States. Is this something that you've thought about like incorporating into your podcast?
Yeah, so part of the reason that I kind of wanted to do this in the first place was I work behind the scenes for another podcast, the previous news hour. And so some of the episodes that were covered this season for that podcast was like gun violence and like students living abroad. And so gun violence especially resonated with me because gun violence is a really big thing right now in the US, especially as it relates to schools. And it's very, very different from countries who are have regulated those more heavily or where that's just not as big of a problem. And so I think just that difference in perspective and talking about that with my friends from other countries who can't relate to that experience here and what we see in the news and in the media, that was a really big point. So I think that sort of like obviously the first episode was a little bit more chill. It was less about political issues and more about like our personal experiences and struggles with things like the pandemic. But like going forward, I would definitely love to focus on those political issues and how they compare in the US versus in other countries. So yeah, really excited for that.
Could you tell us a little bit about your target audience or who you hope gets the most out of these conversations?
Yeah, so I I think a really big goal of the podcast was to kind of just put myself out there and kind of talk about my experience with my education because I feel like I have kind of a unique educational experience as compared to like some of the other students in my area, especially because a lot of us haven't left Georgia before. So like the fact that I got to go somewhere last summer, like I just like that privilege was just amazing. And so I feel like that experience really, really changed how I viewed the world and really what I wanted to do. And it made me really excited to meet new people. And so I think I'm really hoping that maybe people who maybe young people who haven't kind of um left their area as much or haven't like met as many new people from different places. Maybe hopefully listening to podcasts will get them excited about that, maybe give them some ideas of how they can meet people and maybe, kind of give them a perspective outside of the area that they live in, which is kind of, I think, what I experienced for the first time last year and something I want to share with others.
Hi. So I think the thing that you said that really piqued my interest the most, sounds like it's a focus for your podcast, is the difference in sort of educational systems across the world, which I think is a really interesting thing that I'm excited to hopefully see your podcast hone in on, because I feel like it's very hard to know exactly the experience that the students in the high schools are having, because all the information that we're getting is not from the high school students, right? And so you have a very unique perspective to be able to lend to that conversation, to be able to speak to other high schoolers, and then as you continue in your educational journey to other university students, and share sort of those perspectives internationally. And so it was more of a comment than a question, but I find that really interesting. So I'm excited to tune in.
Yeah, yeah. That is definitely something we really wanted to highlight. And I think one thing I was talking about my with my friend who's coming from China who I'm gonna meet at Stanford. One thing is that the US is very different in like the education system as compared to in like East Asia and South Asia. There's a lot more pressure over there. So they have to go to school from like 9 to 5 and then go to cram school from like 5 to 10 and then just do that over and over and over again for however many years, for 10 years. And there's so much pressure that it's just such different educational experience. And it's something that like a lot of people aren't aware of in the US where our education system is just different. So I think that was just something I really wanted to try and kind of, I guess, touch on in the podcast, hopefully like in the coming episodes. But yeah, really excited for that.
And our final question, Maggie.
Simran, I'm really excited for your podcast, and I was thinking about what you said about having friends from these different countries, and I actually had the privilege of doing a journalism class at Boston University over the summer, and kind of like your program, there were a lot of international students and some from China. And when I was talking with my friends from China, they also talked about the pressure of standardized testing, and you're a junior in high school right now, right? Like going to be a senior. And I
Yeah,
think
I'm
your perspective and your age right now is such an interesting age in general, with all of the pressure that juniors in high school face and just all the craziness that you're going through and are about to go through with college applications. And I know because I just experienced that last year. But I think something interesting is that I think that you should do a full episode on like college applications and that aspect of education and how it differs from country to country. And also something I think that is worth exploring is, why are international students applying to US colleges, right? And I asked one of my friends who's from China this, and he said a lot of it was actually because of the pressure and the standardized testing in China, right? because in China, this one huge test determines a lot in your life. Like it determines what school you're going to go to, how good a career path you'll have, just through this one test, right? And that's completely different from American education, which is like, you could go to community college and transfer into a four-year university, or you could go to, you don't even have to have a degree and you can do amazing things. You can make a ton of money and be successful in your field, right? So I think you should definitely look into that, like college applications and how our college applications and how our views of upward mobility and education are different than they are in other countries, right? Because in America, it's like, oh, you're going to community college? Well, that's great. That's really a smart idea because you're saving money. And, you could always transfer to a four-year university, right? Or you don't have to go to college because you might have a great idea for a business plan. But in China, it's like, no, you have to take this test. You have to go to the best university. You have to get the best job right away. So, and, it's different in every other country, right? But in America, we have a huge importance of working and not taking time to relax. But in Europe, it's totally different and they like to take more vacations, right? So there are all these different like cultural norms that I think you should totally explore. So yeah, that was kind of a ramble, sorry. But yeah, I'm like really excited for your podcast.
No, that's a really good idea. And I think that college applications and that college admissions process in different countries is definitely something I've been thinking about. And what's funny is that I had this exact conversation with my friends from Asia. And so I think the fact that like so many different people from so many different backgrounds have had this conversation with their friends, I think that really indicates that, doing an episode on that and sharing that with others would maybe be something that would resonate really well with people listening. So yeah, I think that's just a really good idea. I really hope I can do something like that. So thank you.
For the sake of time, we're gonna wrap up there, but I want to give a big thank you to all the fellows and all of your hard work during this fellowship. I'm excited to get your episodes out, have a full detailed listen through all of them. You guys have amazing ideas. It amazes me every time we do one of these fellowships, some of the things that you all want to talk about. So thank you very much. I'll hand it to Jenna for our closing comments, and then we'll get out of here.
Yeah, I just echo everything Brandon said, and there's been some comments in the chat too, how inspired we all are by the work that you're doing. So thank you all for being so thoughtful, and I know also so diligent. It's not easy to track down people to interview and to put the time into recording and editing and fixing stuff when it goes wrong, and all of the trials and tribulations that come with being a podcaster. So I hope this is just the first episode of many that you all produce moving forward. And I hope that you'll stay in touch and keep us posted. And for anybody who's on here now or watching the recording later, you can subscribe to the Democracy Group's newsletter or follow our podcast feed to hear all of these episodes and everything else that our network does. So thank you all again for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your evening.